Welcome to Techies for Reproductive Justice, the podcast, a place for technologists and community organizers to learn from each other. I'm your co-host, Azamaare.
And I'm your co-host, Lou.
Before we get into our interview, it's time for our first segment, T4RJ's Media Recommendations of the Week, your spot for all things reproductive justice, social justice, and tech media recommendations. This week, we want to highlight Nevada by Imogen Binnie. Nevada is her debut novel and follows the adventures of a transgender New York punk woman, Maree Griffiths. It's a great exploration of gender, transness, and hetero and cis normativity. This novel is written for trans women and does a great job of not falling into the cliche of trying to explain trans experiences to cis people. Now, let's get into the episode.
On today's episode, we will be talking with Nicole Lopez and Rebecca Ackerman from Techies for Reproductive Justice, or T4RJ. Nicole Lopez is Director of Technology at Midwest Access Coalition, where she oversees MAC's IT operations and software development of MAC's piggy bank Cashbox app. She's also a co-founder and co-organizer of Techies for Reproductive Justice. Nicole previously worked as a software engineer with the Digital Defense Fund, building custom software and providing cybersecurity guidance to organizations in the abortion access space. She is the proud human companion of two cool kitties, Ella and Seabass, and is an avid pianist. She is passionate about reproductive justice, coding, human rights, tech education, and how technology can be used for liberation.
Rebecca Ackerman works to leverage technology to advance social justice and equity. Rebecca currently serves as a technologist at the Digital Defense Fund and is a co-organizer for Techies for Reproductive Justice. At DDF, she wears many hats: an engineer, product manager, social science researcher, cheerleader, or policy analyst, depending on the day. Prior to her role at DDF, Rebecca worked at the intersection of social services and technology, focusing on the ways technology impacts access to benefits. Rebecca lives in, sometimes, sunny Ann Arbor, Michigan, with her partner and two cats. And a heads up, in this episode, we touch on issues of sexual abuse and the family policing system. Please take care of yourself.
Well, thank you, Rebecca and Nicole, for joining us. I'm going to start us off with a question that our listeners have been waiting to hear the answer to with bated breath. What do you like for breakfast? How about Nicole? You go first.
I bounce between a few things. I really like quick and easy things. As a true millennial, I love avocado toast. Don't at me. And actually, my favorite one is a green smoothie. I like to get like a whole bunch of spinach and then like frozen fruit and an avocado. Big surprise. Otherwise, instant grits are a go-to. You can also throw spinach inside of instant grits really easily for a delightful treat. And I love my Earl Grey tea with lavender and honey and oat milk. That's my like tea latte situation that I like in the morning.
I love your ability to put greens in anything. Well done. Well, I have my breakfast that I tend to eat, but I like to eat things that I actually rarely have. So I think probably all-time favorite is French toast. Vegan or not vegan, doesn't matter. I just love the like squishy bread, which now that I say it out loud sounds disgusting, but can't argue with taste. I'm sure there are French toast fans out there who agree with you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, y'all. Great breakfast choices. So our next question is, could you each describe yourself and the work that you do?
I would describe myself as Annie from the musical, but like mid-30s. No joke, random people would shout Annie at me, like in the street, until I was like in my late 20s. So I'm white, cis white woman with bright red curly hair and Jewish. I live in Southeast Michigan, where my family also lives. So I am a tech generalist at Digital Defense Fund, where I work with all sorts of folks in the abortion access ecosystem, basically with whatever they need to help them be as secure as possible digitally. Digital Defense Fund as a whole provides technical assistance, grant making,
and training for free to anyone working in abortion access in the US.
And hi, I am Nicole. My pronouns are she and her, and I didn't think about describing myself physically, actually. I'm a fairly short, that's actually something that a lot of people, when they meet me in person after digitally organizing together, they're like, oh my God, you're so much shorter than I thought you were. And I'm like, cool, great. That's a fun one. I am a cis white woman, bi/pansexual. I think both of those terms apply to me. And I think I would have come out a lot earlier had I had access to queer sex ed earlier in my life. I am from a lefty city in the mountains of North Carolina, and I am part Cuban, de mi abuelo, who I never met because he died of a heart attack before I was born. He does have some activist roots, though, and was a labor organizer because he worked in asbestos in Florida and organized people who had been harmed by asbestos. And so I feel connected to him through that. I am an avid salsa dancer, also love modern dance. I'm a pianist, hobbyist, of course. I'm a cat lady. I was an Arabic major and a community taught software developer and tech professional. LOL at professional. The work that I do, I am the director of technology at Midwest Access Coalition. So that's a very fancy title, I feel like. But basically, I oversee our organization's tech. I was doing that as a volunteer since our inception, back when we were on like the free 99 tier of everything. And back when I also just didn't even know how to do what we were doing. And now, yeah, we actually have like a full on like IT infrastructure, which is really cool. And we have policies and have like been able to build all of that up. We have like a bona fide hotline technology and a bona fide database. And we have our own app that was built with a lot of volunteer love and that we are continuing to build upon.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing. And thanks for the physical description. That was actually kind of unique. I like that for our listeners so they kind of get a picture of what you look like.
Well, given all those beautiful things about what you do now and a little bit about where you come from, can you share a little bit more about how your identities or your personal history, any experiences you've had, or the people that you come from, how those shape the work that you are doing now, whether that's with DDF or MAC or other work in your life that is important to you?
Yeah, this one was a harder one for me to answer and to reflect upon. I really love this question, though. I have a very varied background for somebody who does technology work. And sometimes I have felt a little bit like too much of a quote unquote jack of all trades, master of none. And sometimes I've like, been a little like, oh, I'm a little too broad in my focuses, or like I've had my hands in like a lot of different pots, but like not really gone that deep. But I feel like that's been really helpful. I guess like as a kid, I think I've always been very like politically and civically engaged in something, and I've always cared a lot. And when I was in high school, I had like the opportunity to do this like free summer program at a university. My focus for it was choral music. This program is called Governor's School, and North Carolina axed it, RIP, to investment in public education and public infrastructure. But Governor's School truly changed my life and was a formative experience for me, in that I got like exposed to the Kinsey scale. I got exposed to like different ways of thinking about things. I grew up comfortably middle class in a white family in Appalachia. And I have had all of my needs met throughout my life. And being exposed, I think like Governor's School also did a good job of opening up the door to like international kind of concerns and like kind of talking about like the disparities globally in resources and human rights. That was awakening to me. And then also, I think that's where I got this like idea of we can change our reality by like imagining something else. Like we can shape our own reality. I have the power to decide how I'm going to react to something and how I'm going to move forward with it in a way that can shape and create a different future. I have carried with me throughout a lot of my work. I think like having a musical background, like always doing music and art as a child, has also given me a lot of like creativity and allowed me to foster creativity that I've been able to bring with me to my tech work and also to my movement work. I was able to study abroad in college as an Arabic major in Amman, Jordan, and just like being able to live in a different society that is more collectivist, and then or just being able to see the United States and seeing like the water in which I swim from a different lens, then coming back to the US, particularly after being able to visit Palestine as well when I was over there, and to have a better understanding of like what, you know, US foreign policy has done in the world. Like it allowed me to see the US in a different light when I came back, and also when I was there, because it, you know, that point of comparison of not everybody does things the same way that we do here. And that's fine. Like different places do things differently. And the vast majority of people in the world are just trying to like get by and like find somebody to love and have kids and like have a, you know, have fun. It allowed me to see the base level racism in the US a lot more clearly. It allowed me to see colonialism in the US a lot more clearly, like coming back from that international experience. So I was very enriched by that. Solidarity, not charity, I think was also something that I encountered in college later on in organizing. And that was something that, I mean, I think I needed to unpack some like white savior impulses that I had from just my context, specifically the St. Louis organizing community at that time when I was in college was really rad. They're still doing rad work. They really introduced me to that. And then I think just like non-traditional tech background is also something that shapes the work that I do, because like I am a technician. I am constantly in the position of like either explaining tech or to kind of translating tech. And so like being a language person, right? Like tech is really like a language, right? And like having the communication skills and like enjoying the communication aspect of technology, being able to communicate technology. And also like when you're coding and when you're building technology, you're translating human to robot. And that's something that I think the language learning background has allowed me to, has given me some strengths, like learning tech on the side while doing other jobs. Like I was working in the immigration space for a while, worked both on the US folks going to wherever and getting their visas, and also on inbound immigration into the US. I was working on that type of stuff, but also learning tech on the side. And so I was able to like kind of see how, I guess the reason I got into tech was because I have so many different things that I care about and that I'm passionate about. And I'm like, I just want to be able to contribute to making the world a more just place and redistributing resources. And technology is a tool that you can apply to like so many different issues, and that is like so flexible to kind of weave between different intersecting issues, that I really loved that about tech. And I've really enjoyed, you know, the fact that being a learner of tech, when you're confused and when you're sitting on your computer by yourself and you're like, what? I don't even know what to Google right now. You know, like that I think has allowed me to be a better explainer of technology to other people, because I'm like, hey dude, it's hard. It's like, this is not some like you're not stupid because you don't get it. I think that there can be a lot of, you know, like pedantic or paternalistic ways of explaining tech that treat people who don't get it like they're not smart. And I think that that's wrong. I like being able to be like, no, this is actually just really hard. Or I actually like really enjoy like making mistakes and then showing people like, oh yeah, I didn't get it either, you know, like, because it demystifies the technology. I guess I like that demystification process. That's my, I guess, incomplete answer to that question.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. Thanks for highlighting like the way that one experience or one moment in our lives can really send us on a trajectory that can inform us for a while. I appreciate hearing more about your journey. Rebecca, how about you?
I really relate to the idea of being a community taught software developer. That's exactly what I am. I got out of college thinking that I was going to be like a researcher, social science, maybe do something in a nonprofit. I wasn't really sure, and realized that I never thought of myself as an engineer, as a computer scientist. Like that was a world of like gross men or like sexist men. I didn't want to be part of it. And then had to do some programming for some work that I did. I was doing some grunt work on like getting the addresses of every daycare in a state, and they told me they wouldn't give me the data, but they had it all on a website. So I like was complaining to a friend, and he was like, "Why don't you just scrape it?" I didn't know what that was. So I looked it up. He helped me write my first program. But then crucially made me actually like finish it myself. And I quickly realized like programming is really fun. I think, like Nicole mentioned, it is a language, like it is a way of writing. For a hot second, I was really into slam poetry as a teenager. And programming when like when you're in it, when you're really in the flow of things and and you feel like you know what you're doing, it is that same energy. And it's just like a really fun feeling to be able to like do something creative in a space that isn't seen as creative. Being someone who is not a formally trained engineer, I think puts me in a place where I'm a translator the same way a lot of my other personal history does. So I grew up Jewish in an extended family that's very much not Jewish, grew up Jewish in a country that's very much not Jewish, and grew up as a liberal in a part of the country that was particularly conservative before my family thankfully moved. I feel like my entire childhood was learning how to translate my own beliefs into language that other people would understand, coming to terms with the fact that sometimes people just don't understand where you're coming from and who you are. I think the other big thing that really impacts my work today is like, so I grew up cis, white, straight enough, like with highly educated parents. So the reason my family moved quite a bit growing up is because my parents are in academia. And so we followed the tenure train around the country. And so I feel like that has meant that I rarely feel out of place talking to people in power. Like I've also worked in government as a bureaucrat. Like I've worked as a contractor for government. So like I understand kind of how power works in like our political system. I can like figure out who to talk to. So I feel like that's like a huge superpower in activist spaces. And so it's like one of the reasons why I kind of gravitated towards positions work where I can translate what people need into language that's understandable by people in power and kind of vice versa, and like help people understand like what particular steps they need to go through to be heard in different ways. But yeah, kind of similar to Nicole, like, as a cis white ally, oftentimes a lot of my work is internal and figuring out like, is what I'm offering like solidarity or is it charity? Am I talking with people or for people? Am I giving space for other people to talk to those in power? Am I translating because someone doesn't want to or doesn't have bandwidth or whatever? Or am I doing it because I feel like it's my role to do that? Yeah, I feel like those are like some of the really big influences I've had. I'll also say like I was a freshman in high school when the Iraq War started. And so I think just throughout my life, I was in middle school when folks were protesting about Kosovo. Kind of throughout my life, I've like been in places where I saw what people power can and can't do, and the ways in which like generations get shaped, even if like you don't initially think you're making a difference. Oftentimes the internal changes are the most important part.
Love that. Thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate the grappling with power and how that's showing up in our own selves and our backgrounds and what we do about that in the world. So thank you.
I'm also really glad you highlighted your different non-tech backgrounds as well, because I think sometimes people think that like you need to be like programming since you were like 5 years old and just always know that you were into tech. And I think it's important for people to know like you can always get into technology no matter what your background is. And also a lot more people than they realize are techies. So
I think the power of the idea of like who technologists are is so powerful that I thought of myself as like someone who wasn't a technologist or like wasn't a programmer, even though in high school I went to a coding camp. Like I learned to program in C++, which is like for folks who are not like technologists, like C++ is like a hardcore language. Like it is an old school language. We've come a long way since then. Yeah, I think there's so much baggage in the idea of who technologists are. And honestly, that's part of why we started T for RJ to like really help explode that.
Plus one to that, Rebecca, or plus like 1,000. I also did not think about myself as a technologist at all. I thought that coding and tech had to do with math, and that it was a math thing. And I was like, not interested. It wasn't until after graduating I was like, you can do a lot of creative stuff with this. Darn it, I wish I had taken a class. Yeah, every single person, if you're listening to this podcast, you're using technology to do that. You are navigating technology. If you are Googling something, you are navigating technology. Like we navigate so much technology in our world, like that people who are like, oh, I'm not a techie. I mean, like, I think you are a techie. I think you're more of a techie than you realize you are, because we just navigate so much technology in our like day-to-day lives at a baseline, especially way more than our ancestors did. If we're thinking about especially like computer, internet technology, right?
that kind of goes into the next question about how T for RJ or Techies for Reproductive Justice came about and what your vision for the space was. Just some background information. All four of us, me, Rebecca, Lou, and Nicole, are co-organizers in Techies for Reproductive Justice. However, y'all want to tag team that.
The origin of Techies for RJ. So I used to work at Digital Defense Fund, like Rebecca does now. Yeah, so I had started there in 2018 after I'd been a Mac volunteer since its inception in 2014, just toiling on the tech. And in Digital Defense Fund, being in a position where like I was a volunteer at an abortion fund, and then also a tech provider, somebody who's like in the position of both building technology and then also providing technology and like security education and advice to like a broad swath of organizations across the abortion access movement. I guess like having seen that, having a bit of a bird's eye view on like, okay, there are a couple different software projects across the space that independent groups of volunteers have created and that are running their own infrastructure, like kind of like getting a pulse on all of those projects. And myself being a person who is also running one of those projects as a volunteer, one, wanting more community around that, wanting more support around that, and wanting more, I guess, like space for collaboration and being strategic and leaning on each other so that we're not all doing this in isolation, especially since I'll quote a dear friend, Colin, from the Daria app. Colin said, this is such a small community of people. There's no reason why we shouldn't all be friends, or at least just like know each other and be in community with each other. And so that was an impetus. And then also around the time that I guess like the inklings of T for RJ started to kind of coalesce, can come together, was right when SB 8, the Texas law that put a bounty on people seeking abortions, was allowed to stand. And that was something that left a lot of organizations either in fear or scrambling. And at Digital Defense Fund, we were just increasingly being hit up more and more and more for trainings and for advice around what's safe enough, what tech is safe enough for us to use. And then realizing that at the same time, like being somebody who is coordinating volunteers for the building of technology on my own app, not my app, Midwest Access Coalition's app, that a community built, not just me, right? Like this is a community built, volunteer driven effort. Basically like running into capacity issues and realizing, there's a whole group of people out there, like technologists want to participate in abortion access. They want to participate, even if they don't know that they want to participate in reproductive justice, they want to participate in reproductive justice. Like I knew that technologists were hungry for that. I knew that like there's definitely a lot of people who like wanted to do things. And then also seeing the nature of the tech work kind of as well-defined technology work that, we were running into capacity limits with at Digital Defense Fund. And then also realizing that, DDF is just serving the abortion access movement. That is DDF's mandate. And with the increasing attacks on trans folks and on gender affirming care, and having folks from those communities reach out to us and realize, oh my God, we are just, at the time we were just 4 people. We cannot support everybody in this. Digital Defense Fund is unique in that being a tech provider that is in-house in a movement. Other movements do not have that from our knowledge. Hopefully that's changed or will be changing. But knowing that we needed to be able to more easily like rely upon community, and knowing that I guess I also had this idea of making yourself less important in your own organizing, because part of the story of T4RJ is a story of burnout. I was burning out. I was witnessing other people burning out, and we were all trying to like move mountains to like answer all the tech questions, to do all the tech trainings in an environment of increasing repression and of increased fear. And also with the writing on the wall that Roe was going to fall. So knowing that the demands on our capacity would be like so much more elevated. Yeah, that the need would be higher, that we're in a moment now where we are hopefully not fully sliding into fascism, but like knowing that like we need all hands on deck, we need more people. This cannot just be left to, quote unquote experts, right? We need to be like, because I wasn't an expert. I learned this stuff on the job, and I learned this stuff from community members. How can we create a pipeline of technologists into movement work and create a pipeline of movement folks to better hone their technical skills? So it came from a need of like realizing, okay, like in early 2022, realizing that we were going to need to have more capacity than ourselves, and that we basically needed to be able to clone ourselves or clone our knowledge, replicate, templatize everything that we're doing so that we could lean on a bigger community of people. And so that we could also, like, this is movement building as well. So yeah, that was kind of the impetus. Rebecca, you want to tap in and talk about the other parts of it?
Yeah. So when the dog decision was leaked, basically overnight, Digital Defense Fund got about 800 applications for volunteers. People really wanted to help. It was a huge range of people. There were people who had only ever worked at commercial tech, didn't know anything about reproductive justice, all the way to people who were technologists working on movement stuff. Sometimes it was reproductive justice, sometimes it was other movements, to people who were completely not part of the movement and also didn't consider themselves technologists. We got a lot of people who were like, I can use a spreadsheet. If you need someone to take meeting notes, I want to help, because people were just so pissed off. And they wanted to be part of community. I guess I should say, people were so pissed off and they were so scared. And they really wanted a community to process these emotions with, because I will say, like, our culture has led us to be so atomized that when these horrific things happen, we just don't have support systems in place. We don't have the friendship networks we used to have. We don't have activist networks unless you've like been blessed with having someone to bring you in. So we wanted to be the people who were there to bring people in. So I joined DDF actually a couple months after Dobbs, and Nicole and I had this pile of like 800 people who wanted to work with us. I should say we both had experience with the same civic hacking group in Chicago, Chai Hack Night, which is an amazing organization. If you are in Chicago and you are interested in anything related to like tech and people doing cool things, highly, highly recommend you go to a Chai Hack Night. We had seen kind of the power of like just getting people into a room, whether it was real life room or a virtual room, and just like being creative together, thinking through kind of like, is this a tech problem? Is this a person problem? Or like an interpersonal problem? Is this like an interpersonal problem that tech could help with? Like, and yeah, just seeing what happened. And so we wanted that. We wanted T for RJ to have that, to be that space where like, yeah, people could build connections, people could fight burnout, people could feel not alone, and people could be creative together. So in what was it, like 2 months, we vetted like 400 people, 500 people. Also, if you applied to volunteer with Digital Defense Fund and you never heard back, we apologize. There were 4 of us vetting 900 or 800 people. So you're still in the list. We are still working through it. You're still interested, you can also submit another application. So yeah, we got together some training materials. We figured out codes of conduct. We built out a Slack space. We built out like kind of how we were going to meet, community agreements, just kind of everything. And we built this community from scratch. We had our first orientation in, I think, November, December, where we met Azamaare, and then had our first community meeting in January of 2023. And we've kind of been winging it ever since.
What Rebecca was saying about people wanting community and like having a way to tap in, because I think we wanted to be able to provide that like easy bridge for technologists, especially to be able to tap into nonprofit organizing, collective, like kind of support. And that type of volunteering is such like high value volunteering. A lot of small orgs that are like volunteer run, even if they're nonprofit and eligible for nonprofit discounts, they are priced out of high quality technology, and allowing a place for technologists to convene with movement folks and to hear those problems, and also to be able to easily tap into a medley of different projects, where like, okay, well, you know what, maybe you're not a fit for Mac's piggy bank cashbox app because you're not doing Rails, but you're really good at .NET. Jump in on the Casson app. I don't know, just being able to have people free flow between projects and like have an easy onboarding ramp and vetted and trusted pool of applicants, because that was another barrier for abortion funds and practical support organizations and like movement organizations, is like, especially in such deeply politicized, like there's a lot of fear. The fear of infiltration is real because organizations get infiltrated by extremists, especially when you're dealing with like tech. That's like the keys to the castle, right? Like, like wanting to, allow folks to have access to high quality, like kind of tech support without the fear of the vetting part, and being able to take that labor away from strapped abortion support organizations so that they could just like focus on being able to get people to their healthcare appointments in the middle of a manufactured, engineered healthcare crisis.
Yeah, thanks for going into that awesome history of T for RJ. I just really love that y'all talked about like the need for community and like cross movement organizing. And honestly, like just the issues with getting plugged in. For anyone who isn't trying to get plugged into organizing stuff, T for RJ, I think, is a really good way, not only for like abortion access, just for other organizing things you might be interested in, because a lot of people in the community do a lot of different, really cool shit.
Yeah, for real. Well, I'm curious what you think movement folks and tech folks can teach each other. And is that question coming from a false dichotomy to begin with?
I have so many thoughts on this. Like, I literally went to school to study this exact question. um, I think we can think about technology as only computers, but I think that really sells short so many other forms of technology that we have as humans. We are social animals. Like every form of collective that humans have formed, like that is a technology itself. It had to be invented. It gets refined over time. Capitalism, we think of it as just like a natural force, but it's not. It's a way of organizing society. Same with socialism. Like a few people invented it, and like we're still arguing over like how exactly to do it. We talk about implementation for computers. The same thing happens with political systems or like collective systems. I will say, as someone who has gone back and forth between like highly technical, computer technical environments and like organizing spaces, like there's so much overlap in how people think about kind of experimentation. And I would say like 95% of the time when I hear someone kind of separating the two, it's because they're not realizing how intertwined those things are. I mentioned like I worked in government. A lot of that was about implementation of benefit systems. SNAP, what used to be called food stamps, Medicaid, unemployment insurance. You know, policymakers will talk about like, oh, we craft the policy and then the tech folks will figure out how to implement it. Or like the IRL implementers who are like in an office talking to clients. And then there's the tech implementers who are like building a computer system. What no one seems to notice, although thankfully that it's starting to change, is that like the tech shapes so much of how things are implemented. And what tech gets built is shaped so much by the priorities, the people who are implementing things. I have extremely mixed feelings about this project, but I did work on redeveloping California's case management system for their family policing system. And I was a user experience researcher for that project. I was sitting down with a caseworker and she got a call in about a family, a particular child. She searched that child and she came up with, there were like 11 cases that showed up on the computer, all with the biological mother's name. What that didn't show is that that particular county had a policy. It was a free form text field. You could put anything in the text field for the case name because when whoever built the system was like hearing from the implementer or like the in real life implementers, probably there was a disagreement about how cases should be named. So they were just like, whatever, we'll leave it to the caseworker. This particular county had a policy that every single case about a particular child had to be named after the biological mother. In this case, actually, this person was getting a call about a child who had been in foster care for several years. All of the case, like all but one of the cases that were named after this biological mother, this woman, were actually about foster fathers sexually abusing people. So you have this system in which mothers are kind of targeted, that if you're searching for a child's name and you see 11 cases with this one woman's name, how does that kind of sway a caseworker as they're taking in this call and like thinking about this family? Like there are all these tiny little technical details that people take for granted, but that absolutely change how we interact with each other.
Yeah. Ooh, what just came up to me, Rebecca, when we were talking about that example is like, this is just one thing that I think that tech has to learn from movement work is just this idea of impact over intent. And then also like questioning, like, does this need to be built or at all? I don't know. That's what just came up to me is like thinking about how harmful family policing is as a system and how technology then reinforces that and feeds into that. How we as technologists, yeah, maybe you're receiving specification to just add a field to something, right? But like, what are the downstream impacts of that field being added to that database? Who could it harm to even store that information? The way that that information is being displayed, what are the actual social impacts and fallouts of that? And then like you as a technologist, like you are in the power to build it or to not build it. And I know that's dicey, right? Because that's your livelihood and that's your job. And like you can only agitate so much depending on where you are and what your circumstances are. And like I need a job to live, like I can't, like a lot of us need a job to live. So like within the confines of that, but like you still can push back as a technologist and like in terms of like asking questions of where the impact is. Yeah. So I mean, I do and I don't think that tech versus movement is a false distinction. There are different directions and like you can be in one or the other, but I think that these two things overlap so much and there's so much fluidity between movement work and tech work. Other things that I think tech could learn from the movement and organizing world, like first of all, I just think that all tech workers unionize right now because tech workers we are a privileged bunch in society. Tech work is valued very highly. While I don't agree with the way that capitalism has deemed, like caretaking work as not valuable or teaching as not valuable and creating software as like vastly more valuable than that in terms of how much you're going to get paid, right? Like I don't agree with that, but that's the reality that we live in. And if you're an engineer, chances are you're getting paid a lot more than other people and you have a lot more access to capital than others. You leverage that now. That's not always going to be the case. Unionize before your job gets automated away. Unionize to enshrine those nice benefits that you have as a tech worker for everybody at your company, right? Make sure the customer service department is also getting those sick tech benefits that you're getting, right? And you can do that with your tech power by unionizing. Yeah, things that the movement world has really brought to my tech. Questioning, confronting, and even just seeing white supremacy culture or white dominant culture and how that plays out in the professional world. I would say like moving away from exclusionary, and I'm going to have big air quotes around the term professional standards. Does somebody necessarily need an elite college degree to do this job? How much are we investing in people, like in terms of like dismantling some of those like quote unquote professional standards? And I think techies actually do a pretty good job of like bucking kind of some of the professional norms, like in terms of like having your hair a different color, having piercings. Like I think like the tech team is often known for like being the ones in like, the very casual clothes and like maybe a more corporate environment. I think that we could get rid of some of this like professional standard that keeps people out of roles that are otherwise like super qualified and have a ton to offer and a ton of value to bring to the table. I think also questioning unfounded urgency. There's so much urgency and like a more of like sometimes deadlines are real, but oftentimes they're very arbitrary. When is it truly urgent and when is it not truly urgent? Is it so urgent that people need to put their lives completely on hold to do this thing? I guess like just kind of questioning that urgency and allowing for moving with more intentionality. And then also, I think a big one for techies is moving away from, I would maybe call it like a savior mentality or like more of a solutionism mentality where you are the expert and you have all the answers and you don't have anything to learn from the people that you are helping, right? Like you're just gonna show up and give them all the answers and then you're done with it. But questioning that and thinking about it a little bit more like solidarity even, or thinking about it more as like meeting people where they're at, meeting the user where they're at, and as an exchange of knowledge versus a one-way dissemination of knowledge. You also build better tech if you are actually listening to your end user, and if you're actually like taking the time to fully understand the problem, like, and actually understand the problem, because you're not going to understand a complex problem from reading a spec for 5 minutes, or from like talking to somebody for 5 minutes and making a snap judgment. I mean, I think that that's how we make paternalistic types of top-down tech solutions. And then also, yeah, power analysis. Knowing what power you hold as a tech worker and wielding it accordingly. Wielding it in a way to make a more equitable and just society. Wielding it in a way to share your resources. Wielding your specialized knowledge in a way that shares it instead of putting it in like a castle behind a moat or something. And like, how can you act within your locus of power? Because I think tech workers especially have so much power in terms of like, are you going to build the thing or not? Right? If everybody who was a technologist working on the nuclear bomb was like, no, dude, I'm not going to build that, then we wouldn't have it. Or like if we decided, no, I am not going to build technology that where the purpose of it is to surveil and deport people. No, I'm not going to build that technology. Like drawing a line in the sand for that type of stuff. That's, you know, like as the builders and as the implementers, I think we do have power to, you know, to shape what does or doesn't get built. And then for movement people, I mean, I think we have a ton to learn from tech too, just like specifically like in the way that software gets built. I think there's so much like juicy stuff to unpack and like really good lessons for how we're just addressing the tasks that we're trying to do or projects that we're doing as an organization or as a movement. I love the quick feedback, quick failure, and iteration aspects of the Agile framework, and kind of allowing, like, I'm not talking about like a strict Agile way of doing things, but the process of building software, I feel like is very applicable to building anything, building any system. And like this notion of like, make the smallest, simplest thing that will get the job done and then iterate from there. And also embracing failure. As a recovering perfectionist, I feel like when I was learning how to code, I would be like, oh my God, my computer's yelling at me. Like every time like my tests would fail or I'd run into an error, I would feel so demoralized and down on myself about it. And I think it's very easy to have that happen in the movement world as well. Like your project's not working, things aren't going well, or like you're not getting stuff done or whatever, right? And you're like, oh, I'm such a failure. Everything is a failure. And like failures are such a blessing, right? We can learn so much from all of our failures. In order to like actually pull something off successfully, there are oftentimes like an entire elephant's graveyard of like failed or abandoned projects that didn't work until you got to the one that did work. So I think that tech does a really good job of letting your failures be a lesson. And there's this concept of a blameless postmortem. So postmortem, let's say like that's when your app goes down, or like something really bad happens with the app, big mistake, big problem. There's often a postmortem after that to kind of go through and see like, okay, what went wrong here? What happened? I love the idea of like having that process to like look at big failures with an eye of, not an eye of pointing fingers, being punitive, throwing people away, right? Like, no, not that, but with an eye for like, hey, dude, like mistakes happen. Let's look at how this mistake happened. And let's see like where the systemic failures were in this. Like, so the blameless postmortem is like the one where you're not pointing the fingers, right? The one where you're kind of removing the individuals from it and looking at the system as a whole. Because really, like, if your system can completely and totally crash and burn and fail due to the actions of one person without any safeguards in place, that is not that one person's fault. That is your system's fault, right? Because the system was set up in such a way that the actions of one individual could completely tank things without any type of safeguards in place. So that type of like way of thinking about like embracing the failure, embracing the learnings and the lessons of mistakes, and then being able to apply them at a like systems level that's not, like pointing fingers at individuals or putting too much weight in any individual. Like, I think that that's a great practice. And that's something that I've definitely brought with me to my organizing work. And then also just automations. Automations. I'm not talking about automating away, human tasks. I'm talking about automating away those really annoying things that you don't want to do all the time so that you can focus your organizing labor on like the juicier organizing things that you like to do.
I think one thing that was really drilled into me is like find the absolute smallest thing you can build that you learn from. It doesn't even have to work. You just have to learn something about how it will work. For a computer system, maybe that's you don't even build a computer system. Like if you're building an app, maybe you don't even build like anything on a computer. You give someone a piece of paper and look at how they would like where they look on the piece of paper, like find that smallest thing and then think smaller. I think another thing that is a really interesting practice in the tech world is A/B testing. So that's when you have like two versions of a web page and you just see which one people like more, or which one's easier to use. When you're working on things that are life and death, or like at least have large consequences, which all of our stuff does when we're organizing, it feels really scary to say, like, we don't know the right way forward, or like, we're just going to experiment and see which version, like, which way is the right way forward. But oftentimes we don't know what, winning campaign is, or what is like language that will make people feel the most heard. And so, like, actually being willing to take a step back and even when the stakes feel high, embrace that feeling of experimentation, that energy of experimentation.
Snaps to experimentation. Yes, Rebecca, that totally, absolutely. Allowing ourselves to experiment and then fail at the experiment and then improve the experiment.
Yeah, thank y'all so much for that. I think that's such a powerful like reframing of how we're thinking about failure and trying things out. And I think in organizing spaces, it can feel so hard to do that because, like you said, it's really like we're dealing with life and death for many people and for the state of the world. And we are more effective when we're able to try things and to forgive ourselves when we fail and to try again.
I think that also really ties into like the we will not cancel us way of thinking about things, like in kind of like a politics of not allowing people to be disposable, like allowing people to make mistakes. I didn't show up to organizing work with the wisdom that I have now. And I've made many mistakes along the way. And I'm so grateful that I was able to make those mistakes and learn from them. And like, I think we have to allow for that in our movement and our organizing work. And I think that the embracing failure is also, kind of ties into that aspect of organizing as well.
I feel like we could have a whole episode on that, just that question. That was like literally my favorite question, actually, out of all of these. And our last one is, what's one piece of advice you would give to someone who is using digital tools to organize?
Well, limiting to one is hard.
I have one. I have a biggest one, I think, is that there is no single piece of technology that is going to be a silver bullet solution. I think that like people often come looking for like, oh, this app will do everything. This will solve all of our problems. And that's a fool's errand, in my opinion, to think that like one piece of technology is going to do it all or to solve all the problems. So there are no silver bullets. You're going to have to find something that is good enough and then go from there, right? Figure out the smallest, simplest thing to get the job done, what's good enough, and then iterate.
That is such a good one. That is such a good one. I hear that I hear that all the time. I think mine is, I'm a digital defense fund, so I'm always thinking about digital security. And I will say my like number one piece of advice is like do an individualized threat assessment for your organization and for you yourself. I see a lot of organizations that are terrified about making a mistake or using something that's not the most secure. And I have like air quotes around most and air quotes around secure, because oftentimes when you're asking what's the most secure, you're not asking secure for what. Like if you're worried about censorship, that's a different threat than if you're worried about potentially infiltration. I think it's important to be really clear about what threats you're actually guarding from, what threats are like more and less probable, and what threats are more and less harmful. Because that'll give you a good sense of like where you need to prioritize your attention on like what technology has to be like more secure, and also like you'll be able to tell what you mean by secure. I say this especially because extremely secure technology is often harder for people to use. And so if you are trying to lock everything down, that often means people can't do their job as effectively or at least as efficiently. And so you do, in every movement that I've ever been a part of, you really have to find the balance between security and efficiency. And doing a threat assessment is a really great way to figure out where that balance should be. And if anyone who's listening to this is interested in doing one, Digital Defense Fund, we have a few threat assessment exercises on our website, digitaldefensefund.org. Highly recommend you check them out.
Awesome. Those are really great pieces of advice. Always thankful for your wisdom, both of you.
Yeah, so insightful and so inspiring to hear your journeys and what has gotten you thinking about all these rich and important topics that you shared with us today. Thank you both so much. This episode was brought to you by Techies for Reproductive Justice, a project of the Digital Defense Fund. Your hosts for today's episode were Lou and Azamaare. Liz was our editor. Thank you, Liz. Many thanks to our guests, Rebecca and Nicole. If you liked what you heard today, stay in touch with us by subscribing. Want to become a member of T4RJ or have ideas for future episodes? Check out our website, techies4rj.org, to learn more and send us a message. Again, that's techies4rj.org. See you for our next episode, where we hear from an amazing panel of experts on the intersections of Palestine liberation, tech, and reproductive justice. Our theme music is Beauty Flow by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. The song is licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. And thank you to all of our listeners. We are so grateful to be in this movement together.